Once again we go back to our biography literaria. Here we will see the relation between biography literaria and Wordsworth's preface to the lyrical ballads. Chapter 13 to 14 of the biography literaria are devoted largely to criticism of the views on poetry and poetic diction expressed by Wordsworth in his preface to the second edition of the lyrical ballads. Hence, familiarity with the preface is essential for a proper understanding of these chapters. Genesis of the preface called its role. Wordsworth's preface to the lyrical ballads is a critical document of abiding significance. It underwent a number of revisions till it acquired its present form. The lyrical ballads was first published in 1798, and to this edition, Wordsworth merely added a short advertisement or introduction. In this advertisement, the poet modestly pointed out that his poems were in the nature of experiment to find out whether themes taken from humble and common life and composed in language of real people are suitable for poetry. He also attacked the artificial diction of contemporary poetry. To the second edition of the lyrical ballads, published in 1800, he added a more detailed preface. He began writing it in the summer of 1800 and completed it by the end of September. Coleridge claimed in 1802 that it was "happy child of my own brain," since many of its ideas had originated in discussions between the two poets, and he may have even given further help by making notes on those topics. Nevertheless, it was Wordsworth who finally shaped this material and in doing so assimilated it to his own way of thinking. With several of his formulations, Coleridge subsequently came to disagree. In 1800, the preface was revised, enlarged, and perfected for the 1802 edition of the lyrical ballads. The most significant addition to the 1802 preface is the long account of the nature, qualifications, and functions of a poet. The demonstration of his superiority over the man of science and an examination of the nature of poetic pleasure. To this edition, Wordsworth also added an appendix on poetic diction, devoted to a consideration of poetic diction and its history. The preface was constantly revised and perfected for each subsequent edition of the lyrical ballads. But basically, the poet's views remained the same. No significant changes were made for the edition of 1805, but in the edition of 1815, this preface appeared as an appendix, and the volume was provided with an entirely new preface. To this volume, Wordsworth also added an essay supplementary to the preface. The preface that we study today is that of 1802, and as Gare points out, the essay supplementary 1815 forms a worthy companion to it. The preface 1802, appendix on poetic diction 1802, the essay supplementary contain all that is worthwhile in Wordsworth's literary criticism. Wordsworth's aims and objectives. Wordsworth himself tells us that his aim in writing the preface was not to give an elaborate account of his theory or poetry or to make a systematic defense of his point of view. He fully well realized that systematic, elaborate discussion of his theories is not possible within the brief compass of a preface. That was why he was averse to writing a preface. The first edition of his poems had only brief advertisement, and it was only at the insistence and advice of his friends that he added the preface to the second edition of his poems. The main theme and attack on poetic diction. So, what is the main theme of the lyrical ballad? So, preface to the lyrical ballads, and how does he attack on the poetic diction prevailed on that contemporary time? However, However, the theme which dominates the preface and which Wordsworth pursues most consistently is his argument against poetic diction. As Derek Roper points out, the immediate objects of his attack were the gaudy and inane phraseology of contemporary poets. More generally, Wordsworth is arguing against what F. W. Bateson calls a positive theory of poetic diction, Throughout the 18th century, the belief not only that some modes of diction were best avoided in poetry, but that other modes were especially suitable. Thus, a poet might write reddening Phoebus instead of rising sun and green attire for grass, with no particular intention but that of increasing the elegance of his lines, and such elegance was considered desirable. This theory and practice fell into discredit during the early 19th century, partly because of Wordsworth's growing prestige and influence. Wordsworth's fundamental objection to what he elsewhere calls a vague, glossy, and unfeeling language is that to separate poetry from ordinary speech is to separate it from human life. Wordsworth also argues poetry as communication. For him, the great value of poetry is that it permits the sharing of experience, the communication of truths carried alive into the heart by passion. Characteristically, he compares poetry with prose, thus emphasizing its communicative power, and does not draw the traditional parallel with painting, which emphasizes its aesthetic qualities. As an example of poetic diction, he chooses a sonnet of the poet Gray, which expresses very little but resembles, one might say, a small decorous monument. The view of poetry as communication is not confined to one period or moment, but it has never been so forcefully expressed as in the great passage. Then, what is called is criticism to this preface? The Wordsworth's argument against poetic diction is forceful and cogent. Its terms are often inexact. His phrase, the real language of man, sidetracks important questions, and by using the word language synonymously with the diction, he obscures the fact that language involves the organization as well as the choice of words. Moreover, he runs some risk of setting up an opposite but equally false standard for poetry whereby none but commonplace words shall be used. His theoretical preference for the language as well as the themes of law and rustic life obviously owes something to the contemporary tendency to idealize peasants, savages, and others who might have escaped the corrupting influence of civilization. Had Wordsworth really used rustic language, however purified in his poetry, uh, the poetry would have been improvised. But as Coleridge points out, his practice is sounder than his precept. Common modern view would be that novels are in themselves either especially unfit for poetry and that they must be judged solely by their effectiveness. Where they occur, Coleridge goes some way towards formulating this view in chapter 18th of Biographia Literaria, which provides the earliest and best commentary on Wordsworth's discussion of poetic diction. Then he proceeds his discussion on the themes of poetry. Of equal interest and significance is Wordsworth's view of the nature and function of poetry and the process of poetic creation. Wordsworth's view of the scope of poetry is even less restricted than his view of its language. It is the honorable characteristic of poetry. He wrote in 1798 that its materials are to be found in every subject which can interest the human mind. And this attitude underlies the whole preface. Several passages of 1800 can be seen as amplifications of the same idea, as for example, the statement that the feeling gives importance to the action and situation and not the action and situation of the feeling. Subjects, no more than words, are poetic or unpoetic in themselves. A slight incident of village life may be material not merely for works of the pastoral or burlesque kind, but for serious poetry. If the poet can make it meaningful, to some extent, this view was already implicit in the work of poets as different as Burns and Cooper, but until 1798 it had not been decisively stated. Poetry as complement to science. In 1802, Wordsworth extends his own theory of poetry into the future in a striking passage which foresees the possible transformation of man's environment by science. Should this occur, he writes, scientific matters which cannot now be brought into poetry simply because they are not generally understood will become available for the poet's use, and by using them, the poet will help other men to become more fully and imaginatively aware of them. Now, what are the functions of poetry? According to this book, poetry is communication, and it is his own pleasure that the poet communicates. Traditionally, the function of poetry was supposed to be both to instruct and delight. But for Wordsworth, the function of poetry is primarily to give pleasure. However, his conception of pleasure is an exalted one. Poetic pleasure is not mere idle amusement like rope dancing or cherry drinking. Serious poetry provides pleasure of a more exalted kind. It is the pleasure which results from increased knowledge and understanding. He considers poetry superior to both history and philosophy. He considers poetry superior to both history and philosophy, as well as to science. He regards it as the most philosophical of all writings, the impatient expression that is in the continents of all science. The poet, his nature, in a long passage added in 1802, he gives us his view of the nature and character of the poet. The poet is essentially man speaking to man. He differs from other men not in nature, but merely in the degree of his gifts. He is a man of greater sensibility, observation, reflection, and imagination, and of greater powers of communication. He can therefore comprehend truths to which others remain blind. He can see into the heart of things and can communicate his own understanding of the soul of things to his readers. Thus, the preface makes it clear that Wordsworth's view of his own calling is a very exalted one. Then, what is the process of poetic creation? In the preface, Wordsworth also gives a detailed account of the process of the poetic diction. His account of poetic creation has to be pieced together from several passages in the preface, and each part of it needs to be read in its context. Thus, the memorable and misleading statement that all good poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings should not be taken too literally. Nothing could be further from Wordsworth's mind than to equate poetry with a rapid gush of emotion. The statement occurs twice each time in a context which describes intense mental as well as emotional activity. For Wordsworth, the process characteristically begins in a state of calm with the remembering of some past emotional experience. Excitement gradually increases until the poet is almost reliving the experience, yet with a difference. Present emotion is kind of to not identical with that of the past. The difference is that the emotion has now been modified by thought and related to many past thoughts and feelings. The germinal experience has in fact been or is in the process of being understood and evaluated, and is by this means that the ensuing poems acquires a worthy purpose. Thought and emotion, conscious and unconscious elements, continue their intimate interaction until the spontaneous overflow begins that it until these elements are ready to combine in a poem and begin the work of shaping it.